Hi, this is Ken Jureski, and today we're talking pictures with the amazing Yunghi Kim. Yunghi is a well-known photojournalist. She's proven her mettle across the world, doing everything from wars, famines, you name it. I'm so happy to be talking with her today. She's a great friend and a great photojournalist. Hi, Yunghi.
Hi.
How you doing? I
All
hear
right,
it's.
can you read this? Oh, it's backwards.
No, I can read it.
Is it backwards or straight?
No, it's straight. I can read it.
Really?
Yeah.
I have this. And then I have this.
Yeah. Did you pick those up at the protest yesterday?
No, I just wrote it. This is, but I'm seeing it backwards, so I don't know if you're seeing it right.
No, I'm seeing it.
All right, you're seeing it right way?
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So there, break the ice.
So you got your hashtags ready to go.
Yeah.
Your virtual or real world hashtags.
Yeah.
So it's raining there, so I get to talk to you today because you don't want to go outside.
It's raining.
Yeah.
Can't do what I was gonna do.
Yeah.
So you're my default. I'm settling for you.
It makes me feel so special.
I know.
What people don't understand is
I have a way of insulting people.
Yeah, but it's endearing and we enjoy it. And what people don't know is that you really, really like me. And I really, really like you. And it's strange because the first time we met, everybody knew who you were, but you were like, you're from Nebraska and, you know, this kind of stuff. So.
Oh, I don't remember when was the first time I met you.
Yeah, it was.
Was it U.S. News and World Report office?
Yes. You had just become a contract photographer with U.S.
Oh,
News and World
I remember. I think you were not very nice to me there, as I recall.
No.
You were kind of pissed off at me.
No.
I'm just telling you that now as a payback because that's my memory of it.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought you didn't like me just because I was from Nebraska.
Was I giving you a hard time about being from Nebraska?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. So you went to school in Boston, which is kind of the opposite of Nebraska.
Yeah.
And then you went to the Boston Globe. That was kind of a big deal. That's where you learned your craft.
No, I went to Quincy Ledger. I went up the street to Quincy, Massachusetts. Quincy Ledger, circulation 100,000. It was actually a good staff of photographers there. Pepito Matthew was a staff there when I was there. He's at AP New York now. And then Bill Green, who's the director of photography at the Boston Globe now, was also a staff photographer. He was the rock star back then at the Quincy Patriot Ledger.
What year was that?
That was 1984. Fall of 84 is when I went to work for them.
So Bill went to the Boston Globe like 2 or 3 years after that, right?
Yeah, Bill went to Globe, but he had already was making the mark in Quincy, covering the local stuff. And he was already pretty big in New England. And then he went to the Globe, and then I went to the Globe. I think 87 or 88, I'm not sure. I think probably 88. And I was just thinking about this. It was Vin Alabiso who hired me. And I was just thinking about, he hired a lot of women back then when, 70s and 80s, when a lot of women went to work in newspapers and wires. He hired actually a lot of people like, I was just asking around, Susie Walsh, Elise Amendola, maybe even Amy Vitale, because she was a photo editor there at one point at AP.
So this is before Vin went to AP. He was at that paper.
So he was at AP Boston, and then I think he was director of photo at Boston Globe, and then he went to
AP New York.
Charge of AP Worldwide.
Right, Worldwide.
Which was a huge operation back then. So I just realized that. And then he also hires Sally Stapleton as number 2 of all of AP Global. So it was, he people forget it, but he was instrumental in hiring a lot of the women that you see working in the wires today at AP.
It sounds, I mean, so the Quincy paper, that's like 100,000. That sounds like a great size to really get started as a photojournalist.
Yeah, and it was, people. Well, the other thing is people say golden era of photojournalism. I guess 70s and 80s were, I caught maybe the tail end of it. But people say golden era, but there were, newspapers were larger and there were a lot of more assignments that you had to handle. So I can remember doing 4 or 5 assignments a day, and you were lucky if you got to the next location on time. A lot of it was small town, tree planting, groundbreaking, nursing homes, 100th birthday, a lot of local stuff that you did that fill the papers, because the papers were bigger than it is today. And you don't have this forever going online slideshows of one topic of like 10 images. It was just one image, and you had to get it, all the information in one image. So, and then you would have to go back to the darkroom and process and print, and you would have to do it under deadline. So you give yourself another hour and a half for print and process, and you're lucky if you can, if you can get that done.
So you'd shoot everything, including high school sports, I imagine, and dark gymnasiums, dark football fields at night. I mean, you shot everything, right?
Oh yeah, like, you push the film to 3200. Remember, that was the only thing, Tri-X, that you could push to. You couldn't push it more because it fell apart. 3200 gymnasium basketball, and now you can shoot that with digital, and it's enough light. It's amazing what digital can do. But back then you do 3200, you put the extra time in to develop, and you just, you just move and print really fast. And under deadlines, I printed like negatives wet, just put it in the enlarger. You don't even have time to dry the film, just put it in the enlarger and just print it. And you got to meet the deadline. And so
So
that's
what
what you
did
did. No more like file. This is like before cell phone. No cell phone. You had to carry big walkie-talkie to talk to your office with a big antenna on top of your car, like Sparky. It was
so
really much.
so what did that
Scanners in your
do?
car,
What,
police
I mean,
scanners. I had to listen to police scanners.
yeah, you were doing everything, and if and
I was
it's
doing anything, fires to everything. Sure, you had to do it because that was part of that was what was expected. But that was really good training because you learned to sharpen your instincts, um, journalistic instincts. You learn to work really fast. You can assess situations, like especially in a news situations, if you cover enough of them, how to navigate it. You can almost sometimes tell where the event's going to go in a news. A lot of it is, watching human behavior in a large crowd. Um, you learn to, in the field, how to access and work with people, but also be, um, you know, tough when you need it to be. I think on the streets, if you were out in the streets, you had to be tough.
you kind of have a reputation for being tough. Is that well deserved, do you think?
Um, I don't take it as an insult. I take it as a compliment. You should meet my mother. She was 4'11".
I mean,
But,
you've earned this reputation, and the thing that I know about you is that you're tough, but you're also fair. I mean, you always call things how you see them, and regardless of who the person is or the level of authority you're dealing with, or the power of the person. You're just honest straight down the line. You call them as you see them.
Well, so there's a little misnomer. So I am really tough. I'm very outspoken. People say I'm not filtered. People say I need to be edited. But as I said, my mother was the same way. But I think it's better to see what you see. What you see is what you get, than be coy. But on the other hand, my actions are different. I have like my mother, I have a huge heart when it comes to my actions. As you know, as a friend, I'm loyal to my friends close to me. I have a grant that I give out a lot of money. I figured out the whole copyright thing 10 years ago, or I was one of the people who led it because it was just not making sense to me what was going on. So, and then I shared it. And so where we are today for freelance photographers in terms of copyright, we're far better off than we were like 10 years ago when everybody didn't know what to do and we were overwhelmed. So, I think you have to know me, but also, yeah, I can be, when you first meet me, people are, they see the tough side of me, but I don't think that's bad. I don't really care.
No, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying what people don't see is what you just described a little bit, that you have this great empathy for people, and it comes out in your work, and it comes out in who you are. And people
But not
don't.
in my mouth, though.
Well, we're not. What you do is more important than what you say, and it's everything about you is this. There's this kindness about you that people might not see right away.
Right. And that's probably true. And I am, but also I can be very tough. I have high expectations, and I can be very tough. I have certain things, I have high bar. And so I don't know. I think that works really well with photojournalism, because I think there's a misnomer that, photojournalism is a tough industry because you're out in the field, you're having to deal with unanticipated, fluid situations, events, which you have no control over, but you do need to go with it to cover it. There's risk. It's not a safe profession. Often I think it's similar to a lot of what police officers do, in that we're out in the streets and we're coming to contact with strangers and events, and sometimes it's dangerous, clearly not as noble as police officers who are really in the first line of harm's way, but we're expected to cover news as well as some of more quiet projects. So, I think my generation of women who, or also just generation of photographers, we bought into that risk, to do it. Fearless is a quality that's important. So, but if you're fearful, then I don't know that you should be in the industry. So that's how I see it.
Well, you kind of alluded to this a little bit before when you were talking about working in Quincy, and how you kind of got to ease your way into that pattern recognition where you see things happening and you can kind of tell what's happening in a news event, in a spot news event, when the scene's still developing, whether it's violent or a protest or whatever. And so you kind of got to learn this ability of watching and reacting and then figuring out what was going to happen. And that is something I think that a lot of people don't have the opportunity to do today.
Yeah, and I think that's true. There's like a certain logistics access, and I keep referring it to as navigating different situations, but also trying to anticipate it, but then also going with it. So, and that's true with even simple things like going into someone's home to photograph a portrait. It's the same thing where you're doing you're going into someone's home and they're giving you access. So whether it's in the streets or whether it's in someone's homes, you're gaining access and you're working with the situation. And so that just comes with experience. And you can kind of tell when you go to a, street scene, news, there are certain things, the police come, the ambulance come, the coroner comes, the cops talk to the reporters. There are certain things you go, oh, this is a wrong angle. I got to go on the other side of this situation, keep moving around. So you can almost anticipate. A lot of photojournalism is capturing, but also anticipating, trying to stay ahead of what unfolding events are. And so that's something I don't know that I can explain, but that's what's called the journalistic instincts, is you can kind of almost go with it. And that is a craft that some people learn, some people have it, and some people just don't learn. And that's an important part. And that's but that's not in the conversation. So I can't explain it. I think I'm street smart. I think that's helped me from Quincy, Massachusetts to streets of Quincy, Massachusetts to going overseas into other parts like Iraq. And you got to go with your instincts, and you got to go with what's comfortable to you, and know when you're pushing the limits to taking that risk, calculated risk, really, knowing when to take that calculated risk, when not to do it. And it's something that I don't know that I can explain, but I've done it. I've been lucky too. So those are the part of the risk that goes into being a photojournalist. And this isn't just conflict. This is, when you go into someone's home, you don't know the person, but you're going into their home. So you have to have some faith in it. There is that unknown element to it, but that, the way I look at it is I accepted that risk when I went into photojournalism. I accepted the risk of going overseas when I went into photojournalism. I just see it as part of the jobs. So, that's how I look at it.
For me, people don't realize it, but the scariest part or the hardest part for me is going into that person's home for the first time. Like if you're doing something for People magazine, you're going to be spending 3 days with a family. That first day, I mean, I dread going into the house the first time. It's the hardest thing for me.
Right. So like when you go, so it's the same thing. It's just, so again, that navigation that you have to learn, it comes with the experience, right? So I probably hate it too, but you got to do it. You got to go into the house. You got to break that ice. You got short amount of time to break that ice, where they have to feel comfortable with you and you have to feel comfortable with them. You have to gain that trust. And that first day is when you do it. When you're doing 2 or 3 day assignment, you got to do it literally within an hour that you're there. And so one of the ways that I did it is I'm very nosy. So I ask a lot of questions, and I actually like engaging with a lot of questions because I learn from it. I learn from every subject that I photograph. People are encyclopedia of knowledge. That's what I used to think. And so through photography, I'm a better person because I learn from people's experiences or, what they have. So you ask a lot of questions, and that's one way to break the ice, but it depends on the person too. I mean, to get that kind of access, people have to like you, you have to have certain skills where you can relate to people right away on an instantaneous level. If you don't have that skill, you're probably not gonna, do it. Everybody works in a different way. They have different strengths, but I think the way I work is pretty broad in that I can handle a good news story to also handle a good sensitive story where you're going into people's homes and spending 2 to 3 days. And you're basically embedding with them. You're embedding yourself with the families that you go within the short amount of time, and you have to walk away with capturing the complicated issues, whether it's autism, you know, homeless or whatever. You gotta capture that. Living in a refugee camp, you gotta capture that within a short period to um, to tell a story of who they are and what they're going through. So, and that just comes with experience.
So, I mean, you touched on a lot of things that I think are at the heart of a good photojournalist. And number one was empathy. You have to have that empathy. But then that second thing is curiosity. And you mentioned that right away, that you're curious. You want to learn about people. You want to know what makes them tick. Um, if you have empathy and curiosity and the ability to learn, because this is a craft, and you can learn, how to recognize patterns in a crowd and all that kind of stuff. You have those three things, and you're kind of like halfway there to being a photojournalist.
Well, I think curiosity is a big part of it. And I don't know that some people have curiosity. I don't know if it's a curiosity is something you can teach. I think that's something that's innate, whether you have it or not. You can discover that you have curiosity, but some people I just don't think are that curious, which is fine. But to do photojournalism, to be exposed to different lives and different situations, you got to be curious. But like, it's the curious that drives investigative journalism too. It's, you ask questions and then you dig. Curiosity, something's not right, sitting right with me. Why is this is like, and you can call it nosy, you can call it curious, but that's an important part of it. And some people are more curious than the other people. And I don't know that I was aware that I was curious in the beginning, but I think I learned it from being in newspapers. And I actually now, if I had to give young photographers advice now, which is like totally different from 20 years ago, is to go work in a small newspaper for like a couple of years and really, do the day-to-day work and really get experience on how to navigate different situations. I think that's important.
So once you got your feet under you as a photojournalist, you had a few years of experience. You went to the Boston Globe. Um, you're kind of on the fast track, and uh, you were curious about what was happening in Somalia, and you took that leap to go to Somalia. Tell me about that trip and how that kind of changed the
Well,
trajectory.
so Somalia was like the first overseas trip, but that was 8 years into my career. Like I did local news, local coverage for a long time. And so 8 years into it, there was a famine going on in Somalia, and they asked other photographers and they said no. So then it came to me, and I knew it was a big story. So I said yes, but I didn't really know what I was getting into. And so that's why I ended up in Somalia, and yeah, so that's, yeah.
I mean, but it was a risk, because you could have cruised along as just being a local photographer doing what you did every day, but you took a risk to take that trip, and it got kind of hairy at some point.
Yeah, so when I went into Somalia with Will Haygood, um, he we traveled together, and that was the days where they used to team up a writer and photographer, and you to do these feature stories. So we were sent to cover the famine, and the famine was pretty big in early 90s. Um, and what I remember was, it was, this is before the internet, before the social media. So people were getting, it was photographers' images that told the world of famine that was going on in Somalia. So it took a lot longer to travel. Now, you get it instantaneously on social media, but back then it took weeks. So it was the photographers who told the world that there was small famine and photographers were going in off and on. So I went there in 1992. And then the first night we were in this town called Bordera at a care compound. And the first night we were there, one of the warlords decided to take over the town. And it was 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And the local drivers that were there, the NGO drivers, they took the car and fled. So there were no vehicles. So then I was stuck in the compound with Will Haygood and CARE NGO person, Bob Allen. And so, yeah, I can't explain it that well. You have to read the story.
Well, I mean, you were
I'm not a
basically.
good storyteller
I'll
on that one.
I
Will
can tell your
Haygood tells it
stories.
beautifully.
I mean,
I get overwhelmed when I think about it.
well, the warlord took you prisoner, and he told you to leave the country. That was kind of what happened, right?
Well, so we were in care compound and we couldn't leave. And so one of the things, because we couldn't leave because there was nothing. Oh, it's a long story. But so one of the things that I will tell you what I do remember is one of the things that Bob Allen, the CARE aid worker, did was he was brilliant. And to watch him negotiate with the warlords was an eye-opening. And he offered to help the wounded of the incoming warlords, so that as a political, and so I went with him. We stuck to him like a glue because we were not going to stay behind. So we went with him in the truck. And when we were in the truck, one of the guns went off, and like I almost had my foot blown off. And then one of the other things that I remember is as we were getting close to evacuated next day, they negotiated for our release. Bob Allen kept saying, we got to get the vitamins. We got to get the vitamins, right? So I'm like going, who the fuck cares about the vitamins? Let's just go. This was like, we're scared shit. And he says, no, we got to get the vitamins. So we go into the back room and he looks at it and, well, I don't know if I should be telling this story. He looks at the back, he looks at the room, and there's a whole big case. And the vitamins were Somali shillings in a big container. And they kept a lot of cash because they had to pay the drivers and local people to do it. So I don't know how much was in it, but $1 was like stack of Somali shillings. So it was a lot of money, but I don't think it was a lot of worth. So we took our clothes out of our backpack, put the Somali shillings in the backpack, zipped it up. And so when we went to the airport, we took the Somali shillings with us. We didn't want to leave the shillings because we thought, God knows what they would use the money for, like guns or whatever, So we just got it out. And so we took as much as we could in our suitcase, and we went to the airport, and they sent the UN flight, and we got out. So that's the story. So now I don't know if I should tell you this story. You might have to edit this out.
No, it's all good. I mean, but you went back, didn't you? Didn't you just turn around?
Oh, so then for 4 days in Nairobi, and I'm like going, well, it was my first in Somalia. It was like really bad luck. And then I was like, well, I didn't complete my assignment, and if I go back to Somalia, the boys in the department are gonna go, she couldn't cut it. So 4 days in it, and a girlfriend who was with me, Pam Berry, she was there in Nairobi, I think vacationing or something. And she said to me, well, Yunghi, the chances of you getting held hostage again in 1 week is really slim. That's just not going to happen. So then I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Because honestly, I would be really bad luck if I was doing it twice in one 1 week. So I went back in. I got a relief flight. I went into a town called Wajit, I think, with I think Save the Children was there. You know, back then you just piggyback off relief flights and you stay with the NGOs or hitch a ride or whatever. So I went into Wajit and photographed some famine, and then I got out. Yeah.
So you
So
made
that
your
was the
pictures.
thing.
You
It
did
was
your job.
like, what are the chances of me getting hostage twice in 1 week? That chance is going to happen. That makes sense to me. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely.
So then I flew back. So then I flew back and I had the pictures, right? And then 2 months later, George H. Bush decided to go into Somalia, part of Operation Restore Hope, and I went into Somalia in December of '92 to Somalia again. That's when the U.S. military landed, and I was on the airport on the ground before the military landed. And that was when Yanis Brakas and I and John Gaps, we flew in this small Bush plane that was a 4-seater. And I remember all of us were really nervous when we saw the plane. But we had to get in or else you were going to miss the U.S. landing in Somalia. So we flew in.
So we've never talked about this together. I mean, we kind of know the story. We know each other's stories, but I think that 4 days in Nairobi, it was one of those life-changing events where you could have went either way. You could have went back to the States or you could have went back in. And I think that was kind of a life-changing event that kind of charted the course of the rest of your life, wasn't it?
Yeah, it made you, well, the trip reminded you of there's a whole nother world out there. It opened up beyond your little world in America. You're appreciative that you can go into a grocery store and buy any food you can eat here when there's people in other parts of the world starving, you know.
Well, I mean, it's a
That
real thing. It's a real thing that you know, it's that test in life, and you go from the only problem in the world is, you know, oh, I'm not respected, or I don't get better jobs or anything. But then all of a sudden, the real world is like slaps you in the face, and you're like, what I'm doing is more important than what I'm complaining about.
right. Yeah, sure. And so for a long time, um, yeah, you got to put things in perspective when much of the world is not, not in a, there's a lot of turmoil going on, and generally we cover news is generally bad things, so we cover news, and if you do news, but it also made me stronger, and I think it kind of set the tone. It opened um, my horizon. Am I allowed to say this? I realized I had balls. So, um, it just, I realized I had guts, and I was actually stronger than I thought I ever thought. And so then I went on to a lot of traveling internationally, and been to most places that, you know, most people haven't. Never held me back.
I mean,
Uh,
that's the trip that stamped your, you know, officially stamped your badass card. I mean, you
yeah,
are who you are. And
probably.
and so then what I'm saying is the choice that we make as photographers, as photojournalists, we can either realize that the people in front of us are more important than us and we have to make these pictures for whatever reason, or some people take the other direction, which think that, you know, the hurricane or the earthquake happens for their benefit, and they're going to make great pictures. And that's kind of that turning point in the life
I
of a
think that
mature photojournalist.
right. So I think our industry turned into this marketing culture. I think probably with digital, probably in the 2000s, and also with the internet, because I don't think there was that culture before that. It was about reporting, and now it's just gotten more complex in that you're required to um, required to market, and it's easy on social media and on the internet. I think there was a shift in it. um, some of us are behind in it. Some of us seeing what's going on is a little bit alternate reality too, but yeah.
What
But
after
I wanted to tell you this. I want to make this point. This is an important point. So whether you go into Somalia, whether you walk into Iraq, which is what I did at the start of the Iraq War, I don't anticipate on doing these things, but you're on the ground, you assess the situation, and you figure it out. Any assignment you go into, you're given a situation and you figure it out. You either figure it out, you go with it, or whatever. This is the same thing that translate into my whole research that I did with the copyright. And you're given set of situations, which is people are stealing your images like 10 years ago. So what are you going to do about it? And so you figure it out. And so it's the same kind of knowledge, mindset, brain pattern, which is you're in a situation, you're given problem solve, and you figure it out. And so it's the same thing, whether if it's an assignment or whether it's me doing my copyright advocacy work. You just have to figure out. It's a puzzle. You figure out that puzzle that's before you. And so that's how I look at it. So photographers are always concerned about focused on their work, but you have to broaden it to other things, because it's the same set of thinking. And that's where the empowerment comes from, is that you figure it out. Knowledge is power, and you take some time and you figure that out. Information is power. So that's the perspective that I look at.
So along with empathy and curiosity, there's that problem solving aspect. It's always problem solving and figuring out your options.
Well, you got to problem solve, but then sometimes you just have to say, well, this is okay, knowing what your limits are too, is that, sometimes, things don't look right to you. Again, calculated risk. You take a risk when it's right, when you feels right, but if it's not, don't do it. Don't blindly do it. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. I don't know that I can explain it, but I think you have to be.
You don't have to explain it, but that's why we have these long term talks, because it's really hard to explain, but you can give examples. And so you're in, I don't know, you're in Syria, you're in a safe house, and you're going to walk into Iraq. You don't know that you're going to walk into Iraq. You're just trying to get across the border. You don't have a visa. You're not even really supposed to be in that part of Syria. And so as you're getting in, what's that? Was it in Turkey?
It was in Turkey.
Okay.
Turkey went through Syria. I crossed Tigris River twice. It was really not that much of a distance.
So you're in that triangle that's kind of like a weird area, Syria.
Yeah, only 3 kilometers away, but it was it took 4 days.
Right. And
well, more than 4 kilometers, but.
So I always say, it's like you can say no up until that time when you get on the airplane. So if you're in New York and somebody wants you to go into Iraq, or you want to go into Iraq, you can say no until you get on the airplane. But once the wheels are up, you're kind of committed, and you can still pull out if things get too hairy. But at that point, you've kind of made that commitment to doing it. And so then you get into your problem solving mode. And so tell me about, I mean, that walking into to Iraq, that was kind of hairy.
Yeah, so even if you get on a plane, it's not like you're planning on doing this, but if you're sitting in a one place for a long time and the story is fluid and it's changing, and so it's more like you want to be part of that story, cover it, witness it, or you go home. And so you figure it out, and I didn't want to go home, so you figure out, and then you're with other journalists and stuff, and so they're trying to figure out the same thing, group of you. So I mean, you just got to figure out. Chris Hondros was with us when he was, he left because he got frustrated. He went down to South to Kuwait, but you figure it out. Did I anticipate on doing it? No, but I don't know. You just get caught up in the story. It's crazy.
So that's a rough area. It's a rough kind of no person area to begin with, because the borders are so sketchy around there. And the Tigris, that's kind of it moves pretty fast in that area.
It moves
too.
fast, and it's wider than you think. Oh my God.
Yeah. And then it's all like mud on both sides as well.
Oh my
it's
God,
like
mud,
really
yeah.
swampy.
So the hardest thing was, we walked at night, and when you step into the ground, there's no light, there's no street light, nothing, right? So it's pitch black. So when you're stepping into the ground, you didn't know how far your foot was going to go in. And that was the hard thing mentally, is that when you stepped on the ground, it wasn't a hard ground. It sank, and you didn't know, and it went in knee deep. And so that was the hardest thing. So then eventually I learned to look at the guy, our guide in front of us, his sneakers. So how far his white sneakers would go in deep into the mud. That's how I knew mentally how to anticipate how far my feet was going to go in. And that was a huge difference. Can you imagine that? Like a simple things like how far your foot's going to go down. That was like the not knowing how far you were going to go deep into the mud was the hardest thing. And if you're doing that for like many nights, yeah.
And then, so that, that's the other thing. This isn't a sprinting game. It's a marathon game, and it's always the mental challenges. And at some point, it's like getting a warm can of Coca-Cola or having a smoke. It's just like heaven.
Right. But it's a little things that you can't explain, but yeah. And once you're on that road, you gotta finish it, because you're in a survival mode, because you can't go back.
Yeah.
So you gotta finish it. And so yeah. I don't think I don't know what made me do it, but yeah.
Well, I mean,
But I would also say I wasn't the only person. There was like several other photographers who also, it turns out, did some crazy stuff to get into northern Iraq from Turkey, because, journalists are a little crazy.
I mean, do you think that's a real thing? Do you think, I mean, when not so much journalists in general, but photojournalists, they're not quite right in the head all the time?
Probably. Yeah, probably.
I ran into you once in Kabul.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I had just come back from Herat in a car.
I mean, you shouldn't.
I was 30.
You were a mess, but you were like sleeping under tarps in the middle of the mountains in Afghanistan.
Yeah, because they canceled a flight, so we couldn't get a flight. So we drove. I think it took like 3 or 4 days. I drove with 4 Swedish journalists, and they were like fearless. I don't know that I would have done it alone, but they were fearless. They rented a car or they hired a driver with the car, and so we drove. So I saw 3/4 of Afghanistan on that trip, and the road was really bad. There was no road. It was basically dirt road, bombed out roads. So it was a really rough trip. My only regret is I wish I took more pictures from that road trip. I didn't. I think now in digital era, I probably would have taken more pictures, but back then with film, you just didn't take as much. So I regret it because, that road trip is not documented. I mean, now you can do a whole bunch of documentations, on Instagram or on social media, just documenting your trip. You just didn't do that back then. It was about getting to Kabul on time, to meet deadline or whatever. That was what it's about, because you couldn't fly, so you had to take this long trek, and it was a brutal trip. And I remember I was like all dirty, my clothes were dirty, and I went into that hotel, Mustafa Hotel was it, and you were there for U.S. News and World Report, I remember, and you were like all clean clothes. And I'm like, been in the field for 4 days. Yeah, I remember that.
I mean, it's like, that's very dangerous. I mean, that's like a movie right there. That's how crazy that is.
Yeah. There's a lot of movies in my careers, I think, in my head. And I think this is no different from a lot of photojournalists. I'm sure there are movies in your head too, right?
Yeah, sure. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a,
But
you don't.
we're of the generation where, again, we're of the generation, we're silent. We were taught not to brag about this. It was about our work, it was about our photographs.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of that you use that term silent generation all the time, and it is a thing. I mean, we didn't really have an outlet. We didn't, and if we did have an outlet just to like show off, I don't think anybody would ever like put like hashtag blessed for like having a front page picture in the New York Times or something like that.
Right. You just didn't do that. I mean, if you took a selfie, you would have been laughed at. Like nobody took you seriously. I mean, now it's like, selfie all the time. But like, it wasn't about us. You didn't put the point camera at us. I mean, there's actually very few pictures of me working in the field. Maybe there's like 5 or 6 really, because we just didn't think to take photos of ourselves. There's just really very little, and there's a lot of lost stories because of it. And yeah, it'd be if we were like if social media was around when I was walking into Iraq, man, I'd be all over social media. You just wasn't there, and you just didn't think to do it.
No, I started realizing that as, my children get older and they're like, what'd you do here? And when did you go here? And how many, there's no pictures. I don't have any pictures of myself. I wouldn't never
Right.
think of doing that.
No, there isn't. I mean, you're like, I'm scraping on my archive to find pictures of myself working. I mean, I actually took more pictures of my friends, my colleagues in the field than of myself. So you just didn't think to do it. That was it. It just wasn't in your mindset. Now
Right.
you see, photographers with a lot of images on, and there are a lot of older photographers who don't quite know what to do with social media. It was just a different mindset.
So speaking of like older things that are quickly disappearing, one of your first, probably the first time I'd seen your work and really paid attention to it was a really personal story for you. You were born in Korea. You're Korean American, um, and you did this story on the comfort women, which was kind of an unknown story, even to this day. I don't think the Japanese have ever even officially apologized, have they? I mean, tell me about working on, because they're most of these women that were forced into to slavery by the Japanese. I mean, they're kind of all gone now.
So, of the group of women that I photographed in 1996, they're all gone except for one. And it was a story that I heard on the radio. The story broke open early 90s. It was kept quiet, not discussed. So it was in the news a lot in the 90s. So I was, again, curious about the women, and I wanted to meet them, and I wanted to tell a more personable story. There had been images of them in demonstrations, but not behind the scenes. So I was curious and I wanted to meet him. And so I went to Korea. At the time I couldn't get, there was no interest, you know. So I went to Korea, and it was an excuse to go see my grandmother. So, and I spent 2 weeks on and off working on that story. And then when I came back, I didn't know what to do with it. And that was just when I was getting into Contact. And Jeffrey Smith, the director of Contact Press Images, he took on that project and he really nurtured it. And he kept pitching it for like 6 months. And finally it was published in Time Asia and also in US News World Report. But nobody was really interested. Korea's a small country, bunch of old ladies. They didn't, it's not a big news in America. So those pictures gave kind of a private profile of the grandmothers, and really first time published in the West, helped introduce the comfort women to United States, a face of who they are, profiles. And so, yeah, and then it's been published all over the world, and it's still in the news. The work was digitized recently, and then it was republished in New York Times a couple of years ago. So, and when I look at that work, I think I only shot like 17 rolls of film. You just didn't shoot a lot. So I regret, if I had to shoot that now, it'd be different, but I regret like not shooting a lot. You just didn't shoot as much with film because you had to process out in the field, or, you were handling slide, color neg, black and white. You were handling multiple different film types when you're on the field. So, I just didn't, I didn't shoot as much as you think. But on the other hand, I had access to the grandmothers then that I don't think I would get access now. So I'm happy that I was able to get behind the scenes of what their daily routine, what their life is like, give a face to this, not just sexual slaves, but people as human beings, as grandmothers, who they are, and try to show what their life was then, and was what their life was when I photographed them. So it's sort of an intimate profile of the grandmothers. But it was not an easy assignment. But like any projects you do, you never know how it's gonna turn out. You just kind of roll with it.
At this point, it's your images are historical documents. At this point, they've transcended just the photojournalism, and now they're important historical documents.
Yeah, and that's a big part of what photojournalists, what we do, right? Everything we photograph, we may not recognize it as we're doing it when we're younger, But as you get older, you start to look back at your archive and you realize, wow, I have images of that. And then you realize, oh, I could have shot more. So a lot of things go through your mind as you look back at your archive. Um, on one hand, everything from I'm glad I have these images to, oh my God, I didn't edit this image, but now I like this image, to I didn't shoot enough, to I can't believe I did that. So a lot of things go through your head, but you have your work, and that gives you a lot of confidence and you know comfort too, in that you did all this stuff, and your work speaks for itself. You know, yeah.
So we talked about all these aspects: the curiosity, problem solving, empathy. Uh, but when people, they're when you talk to somebody why they got involved in photojournalism, they often say something, very grandiose, like they wanted to change the world. And um, sometimes that happens, and most of the time it doesn't. But if you look back at your career, you did change the world, whether you know, if you did this the right way. We all changed the world because we changed ourselves. So what kind of, I mean, your journey as a person, how did this career shape you as a person, as opposed if you went into like being a librarian or something? What do you think, how that changed you personally, these experiences and these
Oh, I
choices?
think we're richer because we're exposed to different situations and different people. I mean, we learn from every um, assignment that we do, right? And we're we kind of know how these things um, work, and we have good instincts about people. I have a pretty um, perceptiveness when I meet people. There's a lot of layer. I think you're just more astute. Your conversations are more, you know, about politics or current events or what's going to happen. Um, you just have a more keen interest in rest of the world. Um, you're exposed to diversity of different situations. I think that's important. I don't know that I picked up photojournalism as changing the world. I wouldn't say that. I just liked being out in the streets taking pictures, um, just being with part of the photographers. And I still do. I still like going out and shooting. Even though I'm not shooting as much as I used to, but I would say like photographically, I'm at the peak of my um, craft, because I'm more confident and more, maybe more willing to take a visual risk, um, more, more specific as to what topics are interesting. You hone it in more. So those things, that just comes with experience. You're not trying to figure it out. You kind of know what works for you and what doesn't. So I don't. I think we've been exposed to so many interesting situations in lives that I don't think we're blessed because of it. Not because I wanted to change the world, but more because just, seeing so much we're blessed from it.
I agree.
That's how I look at it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's something, and nobody can take that away. I mean, the experiences, the images you've made, those are yours and you've earned them.
Yeah, somebody said, I forget, somebody said images don't lie or something. Oh, no, not lie, images don't forget, because you find your images you go through your archive, you find them, and you forgot about it, but your images don't forget because they're there. Somebody pointed out that to me. That makes sense. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, sometimes it's overwhelming to sort your archive because there's a lot, especially if you have it on film and you have to digitize it. But, you know, yeah, I don't know.
You just sent me some images here I want to look at. I haven't seen them yet, and I'm excited to see what you sent. So I'm going to try to share my screen here and figure this out. So we'll see if I can make it work. Do you see that full screen?
Yeah, so this is picture of Miriam. She's a widow in Afghanistan, and so this is like one of my favorite images. And she's telling me about her husband, and this is her kitchen, and there's a beautiful window light that comes in. And so she's telling me about her husband, and she's crying. Her husband died 4 years earlier, but she's, still grieving because this is not how her life was supposed to be. Anyway, so I think about her a lot. I don't know that I would know how to find her if I went back to Afghanistan. But anyway, so, this is sometimes, is it empathy? Sometimes you just let people speak about, let them tell you their story. And so, and this is a moment where,
Just I don't want to take away from the image, but I want to know kind of the nuts and bolts of how did you meet her?
So the way I met her is also, I can't explain it. So I was at a care feeding center where she goes once a month to get grain of food, and there were many women there. So I just went to check it out because I wanted to do a story on widow in Afghanistan. So it was the way she looked at me. She looked at me with curiosity, and her eyes were smiling at me. And it was just the way she looked at me. I got a good sense of who she was. And I went home with her that day on the bus. She took the grain of rice on the bus home, and I just went with her, and she let me come home with her. And then I kept going back. And the interesting thing was, they weave carpet all day to make maybe like $15 a month between her and her 4 or 5 children. That's all they do is weave carpet to make ends meet. And they couldn't eat meat because they couldn't afford it. So they would just eat vegetables. So every time I went to see her, I would bring her a little meat. And so, yeah, so you have these relationships that you develop with people. And, you do, when you go through your archives, you wonder what happened to them. So I'm kind of going through that with a lot of people that I photograph, because when you look at the work and you start editing or re-editing, it puts you back to when you photographed them, and it may be memories that you totally didn't think about for 20 years or 30 years, and it comes back to you. It floods back, and you're like, oh, I remember that. And so yeah, so this is Miriam.
What is this common for you? It's common for me when that happens, when people just open up their entire lives to you, and it surprises me every time, but it happens over and over again. What do you think? Why is that? How does that happen?
I don't know. I think when you're out in the field, you don't think about it as much because there's a lot of things going on, and sometimes you're in a survival mode. So, and you got to go onto other stories. But I think it's when you start editing and you start looking back at your work, you start reflecting and memories come back. And sometimes, you have guilt trips and you have, yeah, no, it's not always pleasant.
No, but what I'm saying is, when you were looking at a person and you're thinking, oh, I want to photograph them, they're doing the same thing from their side too. They're asking themselves, do I want this person, hanging around? Do I want to let them see how I live? And how do you think that, I mean, that happens to you all the time, doesn't it? People open up their homes to you all the time. It
I
happened in
think there's a
Katrina.
lot of right. So there's a lot of reasons why people open up to their homes. I think generally people are welcoming. I think sometimes people want to tell their story. I think sometimes they're curious about you. Um, I think in Afghanistan there probably isn't a lot of Asian women, so they're curious about me. I don't know that a man could have done a profile on Miriam, but I can. So there's different there's different reasons why you get access to stories. Again, they have to like you. So I think each situation is different. I think it also has to do with how you work as a photographer, what you're comfortable with, what your strengths are, how engaging you are with your subjects. Um, I think they have to be comfortable to have you around.
This is in Afghanistan too, or
No, this is in Turkey. So before going
Turkey?
into Turkey, I was in Cizre. I just looked at this image recently, and we were hanging out in Cizre trying to figure out how to get into Turkey. I think I was there for like 3 weeks, and the war was about to start. The Iraq war was about to start. So, but the border was closed, so you had to figure out. So this is before I walked into the Iraq. You know, kind of a local feature picture, and there was a wedding going on, Kurdish wedding, and so the women stood on the hill like this, and then the men were dancing. So I took a picture, a quick picture. Um,
So let me just get a little more inside baseball here. When you're walking into that scene, when you're assessing the scene, the street scene, you're also kind of doing that with the light. And I've talked to photographers, is that just a subconscious thing that you're moving in the direction compared to the light? Or do you say, oh, there's nice light over there, I'm going to try to work it? Or is it just subconscious, you just like are drawn to it? Because there's
Both,
beautiful light here, right?
right? Both. This was an Sunday afternoon wedding. Both. I mean, sometimes it's subconscious. Sometimes you're attracted to the light. You watch the light. Um, there's a lot of layers of things that go on, thinking process that go on in a photograph, that it happens in a split second. Things line up, you move, you don't even think about it, you're kind of doing it. It's almost like you're kind of dancing in it, and so you just kind of move with the flow, with what's going on, and
It
lines
is a
up.
dance. It is a dance.
Light is one of it. Light is one of it. Body movement is the other. um
I mean,
Sense of space.
even that kid in the bottom right hand corner, if he's not there catching that little bit of light, the image isn't as good.
Probably. I probably wasn't aware of the kid as much. I probably realized it later. I think I was more awed by the black, black clothing of
I
it.
just love it. I haven't seen this image before. Oh, this is the Comfort Women.
So this is a comfort woman. This is grandmother Kyung Kyung grandmother, and she was one of my favorite grandmothers. And she passed away when I photographed her. She had lung cancer, and this is in part of their daily routine. So she had lung cancer. She wasn't well. So the other grandmothers took care of her. They cooked for her. She ate in her room. And yeah, so
it'd be
it's one of my
impossible.
favorite photos.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It'd be impossible for a male photographer to do Miriam, and it'd be next to impossible for a male photographer to do the
Yeah,
comfort women.
probably. I think so. Because I didn't shoot a lot, but I spent a lot of time just hanging out. Sometimes to get that one photo or any photo, you just hang out a lot. Photography is also, photojournalism is the art of hanging out too.
Sure.
You hang out, you invest a lot of time hanging out just to get split second image of something that goes on. I don't know. Now, like you see still lives mixed into edits. That would have never happened 10 or 15 years ago. It's the editing is different now because of the internet. Forever click, click, click. You have more
filler images.
Filler images. You see a lot of filler images between content images, and that just didn't happen. So you spend a lot of time. If I was there now, I probably would take more filler images, but you just didn't, because if you took filler images, it's just like more film you have to process out in the field, and you might miss your deadline.
You might miss your
plus
deadline.
newspapers didn't have space for that filler image, so you just didn't do it.
Right. But
so
also,
or magazines.
No, you had 36 images. You didn't have 3,600 images.
Right, and you had to process that in the film and then scan it and transmit it. You didn't have time for that. So it was a different way of thinking. They're a different way of working, just because limits of film. Logistically, there are benefits of film, but there's also limits of film compared to today and technology and social media. And so this is also a knowledge that's,
Well, the first three images that we've looked at here, the detail to the light, you talked about the window light coming in on Miriam. This light here is a similar situation, that beautiful light coming across her face.
And there's a light on this side of her.
That's something that with film you really got to pay attention to, the quality of that light, because you can't fake it.
No, and also digital now. So this image is digital, and this was at Trayvon Martin protest in Union Square, and this was, I think, 2014, and I was covering a lot of protests. It started with Occupy Wall Street, and I just kept going. Occupy Wall Street morphed into Black Lives Matter with Trayvon Martin's death. And there was a huge protest. New York City blew up into protests that went on for days or weeks, or months. So this was a protest from it. And I didn't realize I had the shot until I was editing it.
No, it's a moment. It's an emotional, it's just about emotion and action and movement.
Right. So there's different layers to it. So the whole protest work that I was photographing for many years, still photographing, I purposely avoided photographing signs, because
signs are the worst.
You want to tell a story. You don't want to react to signs.
Right.
Even though some of the signs are really great, great writings on it. You want to take it for that of the period. But for me, it was telling the story without telling. You shouldn't have to use a sign to tell a story. You should tell a story by moments. And so this is, I would say, one of my favorite pictures from the protest.
Yeah, lovely.
So this is like, I don't know if people realize. So this is one of my favorite photos, because this is actually an arrest that's going down. This was like 2012 May Day protest, and the protesters on the bottom there in black They're called Black Bloc. And so now, like, that was like first I've seen Black Bloc, and I just thought they were kids dressed up in tough black clothes acting tough. But now it's more morphed into more militant, or at least the politicalness of it. So you know, they were, so I think you can say they were Black Bloc. It's hard to say because there's different names. Antifa now, they're called Antifa. And back then you would call them. So, and I think Bloc is how dress, which is important. So, so they were like right next. This arrest was going down, and you see the cops, and then you see the guy with the baseball cap, and he's an undercover cop who was right next to me. And so this is literally when they were trying to nab this protester right next to me. And, you know, I probably didn't realize I had it until I looked at my take later on. And so I like this image because it's, you know, shit's going down. It's a moment when the shit's hitting the fan.
Yeah.
Okay, am I gonna get bleeped?
There's no bleeping here.
So this is in Rwanda, 1996, 1994, they fled because of the genocide. You know, I don't remember. Like, I've seen different numbers. 800,000 too. People fled because there was genocides of Hutus fled. Tutsis were massacred. Anyway, so 2 years in the refugee camps, they went back in 96, and I happened to be there. And so this is Yolanda, and I met up with her on the road. And again, I can't explain it. It was just my instincts told me to follow her. So me and two of my girlfriends that we were sharing a car with, we followed her. She was walking home from the refugee camps. It was like a 2-week journey back to mountains of Rwanda. And so we saw her in the road as she was entering back into Rwanda from Goma, Zaire, now called Congo. She was walking, and we just followed her, and we walked with her. And so while we were walking with her, we got a little bit of story of, you know, she spent 2 weeks in the refugee camps, and finally she was going to the mountains to see. And this is her mother-in-law that she's hugging. And we walk for 4 hours with her, and beautiful mountainside, patchwork. It looks like a quilt. One of the most beautiful countries. And so when we took this picture, you kind of knew the reunion was going to happen. Again, anticipation. So you kind of knew the reunion was going to happen. And when this happened, like 3 of us were all in tears as we were taking this picture, because, you know, what had happened 2 years before, and then finally it came to this image.
So there's something I have to point out here, and it's becoming more and more obvious. And yeah, I've known you for whatever, long time, but a lot of times you are working, like what you said, with your girlfriends. And a lot of these images that we've looked at so far wouldn't have been made by a man. And I don't want to get political or anything. I'm not trying to do that. But there is, and this image here, I don't think I have a hard time thinking that I would have like hooked up with this woman and followed her for 4 hours and made this picture. And I'm just wondering, you know, there's something there that's significant. I don't know exactly what it is.
Well, so I think comes down to how you work, how you anticipate. I almost knew when I saw her, like, where is she going? We gotta go with her. There's gonna be a reunion. You know, when you've spent 2 years in a refugee camp and you're going home to the mountains of Rwanda, you're curious to know what's going to happen on the other hand when they get there, when they get home, whether it's the home's not there or the home's there, or, you know, whatever. So that's the curiosity, right? And that's part of the journalistic instincts, right? There's a story there and you want to know what the story is going to be. And so you invest that time in 4 hours. When we started out walking, we didn't know it was going to be 4 hours, but it was just beautiful walk. So you just go with it. And sometimes you just have to be patient, again, hanging out. And so you go with it. And so at the end of it, this was a reunion. And so this has happened over and over. And so I don't know. I don't think this has to do with women or female in this situation. I mean, Ken, if you were with me, we'd be walking together, and get this, you might have gotten slightly different angle of the shot, but you know, we might be like, Ken, let's walk with her, see where she ends up, you know? So there's that camaraderie when you're working with somebody in the field long time, you know, you start to kind of work together and you know what works and what doesn't. And so you kind of groove on a daily basis to check out different locations and different stories. And so you work together. And so I think that was what this situation is, you know, and that's part of being, again, comes with experience, navigating the situations and anticipating and curious about it. And so you can say, like, you can say empathy. I think this photo has empathy. I don't know.
Well, I think our workflow is pretty much identical. The whole idea of curiosity, getting lost on purpose, just going out and seeing what you see, going that next mile, going that next block, not knowing what's there, and all those things bear fruit. This
Yeah.
is, I mean, it's just a beautiful image, and yeah, if I was lucky enough to be with you, I would have made.
Yeah, we'd be like, listen, if we're traveling together or whatever, sharing a car, we'd be like, Ken, let's go to this thing, you know, let's go walk with her. Because sometimes, you know, a lot of it is being out and just hanging out, you know, hanging out in street corners of New York, having a cup of coffee. A lot of times it's not even about taking pictures. It's just hanging out and just getting the
Being
sense
there. You
of
got to
being there,
be
but
there. You
also
can't be in your hotel room. You got to
observing.
be there.
Right. You can't be in front of your computer. Being out there and just observing the local scene and just observing people, and it's not even taking pictures.
Right.
You're just kind of like
Immersing yourself into the
in the
thing.
neighborhood
Yeah.
of that place. And the longer you stay there, the more little things you start to see that you may not see on your first trip. But if you hang out there and you just have a cup of coffee or whatever, you start to see things and you start to get ideas and you start to get, I mean, that's part of being a photojournalist, being patient and hanging out, you know, and you got to invest time in doing it. If you don't do it, you don't, you know, but I don't know if it's something that I can explain.
No, it's so true though. It is so true. Just that art of hanging out, like you said. So true. Beautiful image.
Oops, I put a watermark. Okay, so all right, so wait. The other image of the little girl sitting there, not this one, the other one.
Is it did we already see it? We didn't
No,
see it
no,
yet.
go forward.
Yeah.
All right, so this was the
This is
image I took
beautiful.
first.
I love this. I've never seen this picture.
Oh, it ran. Anyway, so this was a little local neighborhood story I did on Brooklyn, Chinatown. And it's really hard to photograph there. And it was like one of the hardest places to photograph because everywhere I went, people are like, no pictures. So it was really hard to photograph. So I was backed up against a phone booth. Would have disappeared, and somebody would have said no
Tell
pictures.
me that story again. I think we lost the internet for a second there. You were backed up against a phone
So
booth?
I was backed up against old phone booth, which was right in front of her. And I actually had the cell phone look as if I was looking at the cell phone, and then I had the phone camera underneath me. And I was really taking pictures, but as a distraction, I was doing this. Because if she knew I was taking pictures, she would have just said disappeared, or somebody would have said no pictures, right? But it was so, and then I was trying to get the people going by motion, so blurred, and it was a fairly slow shutter, so I just kept clicking it until I got the right positioning. And so I'm up against the phone booth doing this little decoy. And then if you go back to the other image, this little girl comes up and she looks at me and she sees what I'm doing. She reads it. She looks at my camera and going, what are you doing? So I was like, ooh, I'm busted. And so then it was like, oh, that made it for a good picture too. So like in the edit, which one do you go? The other one or this one? They both kind of tell a slightly different story. The other one's more graceful. This one's a little bit more curious. So then I was going back and forth and I decided to go with this image.
Oh, this is lovely. I like it.
So then this is in Brooklyn, Chinatown. It was to photograph just even street scenes there, because they thought, like, often they think I'm a cop. Maybe because I wear a baseball cap or something, or maybe it's the way I dress. Anyway, so, you know, because also, like, if you're hanging out in the streets without taking pictures, that could look suspicious too, because that's what cops do, right? So sometimes people think you're a cop. Anyway, so I was trying to get the crowded street scene of a lot of people in front of this fish store, and I couldn't get it, because even when I was like on the street, not aiming at the fish store, but at the crowd, you know, they would be kind of hostile to me. I won't tell you what they called me, but anyway, so so the way I got around it was, I think it was actually Jeffrey who told me to do this, because I was like complaining to him. And I think Jeffrey's like, well, go on the bus or something. So there's a bus that goes by. So I went on the bus and I went back and forth on the bus like a few times, trying to get the right image. And even with the two boys in the front, I kind of didn't shoot it like this. I shot like this. And so you get a kind of sense of place, the crowd. You know, it's a sense of place picture, really, of Chinatown, street scene of a Chinatown.
So both those last two, the last two images, this image, they're beautiful images, but you're problem solving. You're still getting what you need to tell your story, and it looks like a really fantastic essay. You know, just by seeing a couple
Yeah,
selects.
so you figure it out. And the other thing is to get, so 8th Avenue is largely Chinese neighborhood. Few streets down is Hispanic neighborhood, and they have a Puerto Rican Day parade. So I went to the Puerto Rican Day parade to photograph the Chinese that came to see it, just so I can photograph the Chinese at a parade, because on the streets I couldn't photograph the Chinese because they'd be like, no photos. Anyway, so yeah, you figure it out, but it was hard. It wasn't easy. So this is part of the Comfort Women, and I gave you this image because what's interesting is this was like 1996, right? So that was back then. I don't think it happens now, but a lot of the street corners, there were military posted on the street corners as security, because, you know, Korea is still at war with North Korea. And so that was a common scene back then. And so even the Comfort Women were protesting there on the left. And this is in front of Japanese embassy. They protest every Wednesday. They still protest every Wednesday. There were security guys in front of them.
It's really a good image.
I don't think you
it's really a good image.
now. Huh?
This is really a good image, and it's a storytelling image, and it's so powerful. And I don't know that people. I mean, you talked about layers here, and you got these, you got the three different layers happening here, and you have this confrontation, which is just like, it's absurd, it's ridiculous in its nature, and it's
It's
just such a good
overkill,
image.
but right, but it's overkill, but it was a common scene back then because a lot of the street corners had army or security like this
Sure.
in Seoul. And it's of the period, really. So I don't know if I liked it at the time, but like now that I look at it and, I like it. I
No,
don't
I
know.
want to see this as a double truck. This is like the perfect double truck, and those two guys, the two guys, you know, they're just, they kind of like glue the scene together. So good, Youngie.
So this was from, I don't remember, 1980s. And this is Marshfield, Massachusetts. And recently I scanned this and I found this image. And you can see the
I see the
negative marks where the
yeah.
processing wasn't perfect. And so this would be a weather feature, which is, I used to do 4 or 5 assignments. And then you would, if you came across a weather feature, you would photograph any, and they were weather features were like standalone features that the newspapers needed to plug the extra space that they might have. And so I would shoot these. And so, and it was, enterprise standalone pictures. And so this is a picture and I like it. I don't,
I like it too, and I like it that this was part of your routine.
Oh
You probably
yeah.
did 4 or 5 of these a week.
You do 4 or 5 of these a day. And the other thing was, I don't know that you would get laundry lines like this now because everybody uses a dryer. But back then, I think it was common. I don't think
No,
you
and
would, yeah.
it's got a great New England type of feel to
Yeah,
it.
New England, right. And so this was, I think last year, when Trump, when the immigration ban happened the first one, January 2007, I went to JFK and because there was a lot of anger over the immigration ban. So I went there and photographed, protests. And it's part of the continuation of protest work that, I'm still photographing. And so this was the rage over Trump administration's policy over protest. And so I put it in.
Nice.
This was published in New York Times.
Hashtag blessed. It's a week in review. The week in review is big for us.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeffrey.
I love this image. I know this is your Coney
sorry,
Island.
I gave you all these images with watermark.
That's okay.
So I did this part of the New York neighborhood series. I did, Coney Island's been photographed to death, but not in the winter, apparently. So I went to Coney Island in the winter, and it was nice because no one was there because in the summer it's packed. So I photographed it in the winter, and I was trying to catch the snow. And every time I went out there, the snow would like kind of melt away. And so I used a flash to capture the snow in the air because it wasn't really showing up. And I think this is with wide angle, so the flash really worked. And then in the back is the iconic Coney Island structure. And then you see the little people, they come to Coney Island to take selfie pictures and then they go back. And so I got them going down, they give us selfie and then I go back. So that's part of the Coney Island picture. So it was a lot of kind of empty beach pictures.
So tell me how, so we just saw the wind picture with the laundry, and this is kind of similar, but it almost, there's a connection there as far as visual continuity, but these look like 2 different photographers. It really shows how you've grown as a photographer. I think those 2 images.
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean, and I don't know. This what
The
that one was
movement is almost the same as
right.
well. The movement, you know, but this is a mature photographer that makes this picture here. Someone who's really knows their way around uh, a visual world. I guess I don't know how else to
Oh
describe it.
yeah, or like it's digital and you can just shoot and not worry about one film, one frame. You got to go back and process. You can look at it in the back. Oh no, I got to do it again. Keep doing it. Keep shooting it. More snow.
So this is an important image. This has really gotten um, this image got a lot of attention when you made it, and it's become more powerful today, I think.
So this was part of my protest. Um, so there was a protest going on in Baltimore because Freddie Gray's death, and he was a gentleman who I think was 15 or 16. The police arrested him and then they took him to a rough ride, and then by the end of it, the guy was dead. So it's part of Black Lives Matter police brutality. And when he died, there was a string of other deaths that happened. And so it was a national outrage that was going on. So there was, this was, I think, day after his funeral, and there was protest that erupted, and it got pretty hairy. And so next morning, I just got in my car with a couple other Brooklyn photographers. Like 4 o'clock in the morning, we left, and I just went there, and I went on several protests, and um, these guys, again, sometimes you can kind of feel the energy of a place or situation or people. And so this protest, I stood there for like 45 minutes, and I can feel the energy of these group of men. They were very emotional, and they were making speeches, and I just stood there the whole time, like literally with my camera like this, and I didn't move, and I just watched them, and absorbing the emotion that was going on. And they were quite very upset, and they were expressing their anger. And so, and this is the image that I got. Now there were a couple other photographers nearby. Like I wasn't the only one there, but they missed it because they were like iPhone uploading images on Instagram or whatever. I was just, back then I wasn't even on the Instagram, but like, so I just stood there because you can almost feel like this is you kind of know this is a situation it's worth investing time and wait and stay here. And I can't explain it, but you just know it for being in a lot of situations. So I was there, and I just stood there the whole time. And I didn't really realize what I had until I came back and edited it, because I knew there was a lot of things going on. And then when I edited it, I was like, holy shit. Anyway, so then I was gonna post it on social media because I just got in my car and went, which is what I tend to do a lot. I just kind of go. So I was gonna post it on social media, and Jeffrey's like, who's the director of Contact, he's like, no, don't do it. So I was like, oh, okay. So I didn't do it, and then he pitched it around, and so it was in New York Times Opinion Sunday Review. And then when it was published, I got like a lot of beautiful emails from people saying thank you for capturing this, because I want my sons to see this image. And well, I got beautiful emails from it. So and I
So
think this image shows the frustrations of you know the Black community and what's going on with Black Lives Matter. And you know it's not about tear gas, which is what um, we can easily photograph. It was looking deeper into, capturing the emotions that people are feeling because of Freddie Gray's death. And so anyway, so yeah, so that's how it happened.
Well,
Did that explain it really well?
yeah, and I'm just going to elaborate on what you said because you're a little humble at times. Um, so there's this is like a perfect moment. The framing, the composition is perfect, and then the light is perfect. And so,
And that the tear shows up too, like I don't know,
no,
sometimes
it's
the
just,
photograph you don't know if it's
yeah, you can, it's hard. Tears are hard that way, but
so
the
are huggings.
silver,
Huggings are hard to photograph too.
yeah, hugging's really hard because it just looks like they're wrestling or something. That
Yeah,
this is
you just get shoulders and
right.
but anyway, so this was a um yeah, so it wasn't a violence picture, it was a human picture of um the pain they were feeling because of what happened. So yeah.
We talked earlier about that dance that you're out on the street and it's a dance and you're moving around, and usually when something like this happens, it's so frustrating. And you stood there, like you said, for 45 minutes, and because you had that sense, you had that instinct, and it paid off. And I can't imagine, the 10 other images that were made in that 45 minutes by other photographers. None of them can compete with this. And the power of the single image, we think in groups and, oh, I transmitted, yeah, I put up 20 pictures on Instagram and blah, blah, blah. That single image, the value, I mean, what would you trade? Would you trade a week's worth of work for one image this good? Would you trade a month's worth of, because that's how powerful it is.
Well, I don't think of it that way. I just think of it as I'm not that calculating. I just think of it as I'm glad that I got it and I'm happy that I got it. It wasn't an assignment. I just got into the car and went. And
So you left the comfort of your home and you went outside. That's
yeah,
step
and you
number
just
one.
kind of know. Yeah, and sometimes you just go, and sometimes you just kind of know. Sometimes you're late, sometimes it's not worth it.
But everything,
But you gotta
everything,
keep going.
everything
You
you've
gotta be out in the
learned,
street. You gotta try. Right. So
everything you've learned throughout your career made it possible for you to actually make this image, because you're 3 feet away from these people, but you're in their you're in their zone. You're like right
right. So
there.
I'm 3 feet away, but I was surrounded by other people. So it was like a circle of people, but I was just in it. And also I couldn't move. So, but
See, you're being too
so
humble. You're being too humble.
but you knew, like I knew, I don't know that I was gonna get a picture, but I knew not to leave. And that's
Right,
something you learn. Know not
right,
to leave. Sometimes it's a mistake, but sometimes
right.
you capture that moment. So I knew not to leave. I knew not to leave, just leave. And it was like it was crowded, but I knew not to leave because if I leave, I might miss something. So I stay there for probably 45 minutes. And I would say generally like 45-minute rule is a good rule to learn, just to
Right,
hang out. That's a good time to hang out because if it
right.
doesn't happen, you kind of move on. But sometimes, you have the problem of like you hang out too long and you don't leave. And sometimes maybe you should leave.
Right, right.
But this, I knew not to leave.
I mean, the composition is so, I mean, the moment, the composition, and if you don't have those other things, the emotion of the image doesn't work as a whole. And so you've got everything here. That's
Right.
why, I mean, I'm gonna, okay, we're back. Youngie, do you have any
All right, are
books
we
you'd
done?
like to? Yeah, almost. Just a second, please. Do you have any
Say, oh
books?
shit.
You have any books you'd like
Shit.
to recommend? What's your favorite photo book? Go ahead and tell me.
Oh, I'm not good at that.
It can be one
I'm
of
not good
mine.
at that. Oh, your book. What was the book? An Iraq War? I have a collection of books. I don't know. I'm bad with that. I'm the wrong person for that.
Okay, I'll just pick one later. Yunghi, I think, the stories and the lessons you shared today are so valuable for for all photographers, not just young photographers. I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for being a dear friend, and I just adore you.
All right. If I said anything, edit me out.
I'm not. It's all going in. I
Oh,
love
shit.
you.
Oh, shit.
I'll
Bye.
talk to you soon. Bye
All
bye.
right. All right. How do I end this?